My name is Kevin. I was just 14 years old when something happened that changed my life forever. Every morning my father and I would wake up while the world still slept. 3 a.m., the start of a new day. For most it was the middle of the night, but for us it was our time. The bond between a father and his son is something special. My father and I, we had that bond. Our early morning ritual wasn't just about getting a head start on the day, it was about spending time together. And it was in this familiar routine that the extraordinary unfolded. My father was a baker. He had this incredible talent for transforming simple ingredients into mouth-watering masterpieces. He'd built our kitchen himself, brick by brick, and at its center stood his pride and joy, a magnificent hand-built stove. Every morning the stove would roar to life, its warmth spreading throughout the house. The smell of baking bread would soon follow, filling every nook and cranny with its inviting aroma. My father's movements were a symphony of precision and grace. He kneaded the dough with strong, calloused hands, each push and pull a testament to years of experience. The kitchen was our sanctuary, a place where we could be ourselves, free from the worries and distractions of the outside world. It was in this haven, surrounded by the familiar sights, sounds and smells of our early morning ritual, that the unthinkable occurred. One morning I woke up a little later than usual. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to peek through the cracks in the curtains. The house was still and quiet. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, expecting to find my father already hard at work. But the kitchen was empty, the stove was cold, there was no aroma of baking bread, no sound of my father's humming. A sense of unease crept over me. That's when I saw them. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the dread that was quickly consuming me. Through the swirling grey, I saw it. A figure. It was standing at the edge of the fog, just beyond the reach of the weak light spilling from the kitchen window. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the lighter grey of the fog. "Dad?" I called out again, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for something. I needed to know who or what was out there. Fear warred with curiosity, urging me closer. The figure shifted slightly, and the fog parted just enough for me to glimpse its feet. They were bare, the skin wrinkled and pale, like ancient parchment. The toenails were thick and yellowed, grotesquely long and curled. They were the feet of someone very old, someone who should have been long gone. As I stared in horror, the feet began to move. They shuffled forward, slow and deliberate, each step sending a fresh wave of terror through me. The figure was moving towards me, emerging from the fog like a creature from a nightmare. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on those horrifying feet. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was something else entirely, something unnatural. The fog swirled around the figure's legs, obscuring everything else from view. But I didn't need to see more. Those feet were enough. They were a window into something ancient and evil, something that filled me with a primal terror I had never known. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only watch in helpless horror as those feet shuffled closer and closer, their pace agonizingly slow. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sickly sweet and utterly foul. My body screamed at me to run, to escape while I still could, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. With a gasp, I tore my gaze from the horrifying apparition and turned to run. Adrenaline surged through my veins, propelling me back towards the house. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the presence of the figure behind me, its cold, malevolent gaze burning into my back. I burst through the kitchen door, slamming it shut behind me. The sound echoed through the house, shattering the stillness. I fumbled with the latch, my hands shaking so badly I could barely connect with the metal. Finally, I managed to secure the lock, feeling a surge of relief as the bolt slid home. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, my entire body trembling. I thought I saw something, I stammered, my voice trembling. My father turned back to his work, a small, reassuring smile on his face. "Just your imagination running wild, son," he said, his tone casual. "It's still early. Your mind is playing tricks on you." But I knew what I had seen, those feet, that presence. It was not a figment of my imagination. "But you were outside, weren't you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father turned around, a look of confusion on his face. I shook my head, unable to speak. It was nothing, I mumbled, turning away from my father's questioning gaze. I couldn't explain it. How could I explain something so utterly impossible, so deeply unsettling? The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I went through the motions of our usual routine, but my heart wasn't in it. The memory of those feet, the feeling of being watched, lingered in the back of my mind, casting a shadow over everything. My father tried to engage me in conversation, to draw me out of my silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of that morning never faded. It haunted my dreams, crept into my thoughts when I least expected it. I started avoiding the back door, the fog, anything that might remind me of that terrifying encounter. I threw myself into my schoolwork, my hobbies, anything to distract myself from the fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. But it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to resurface. I stopped waking up early with my father. The thought of being in the kitchen, of venturing out into the pre-dawn darkness, filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. My father noticed my withdrawal, the fear that shadowed my every move. The bond we had shared, forged in the early morning hours, began to fray. My father sensed my distance, my inability to confide in him. He tried to bridge the gap, but his efforts were met with my silence, my withdrawal. I hated myself for it. I hated the fear that kept me from sharing my experience with the one person I trusted most in the world. But I couldn't help it. The terror was too real, too deeply ingrained. I knew my silence hurt him, that it created a barrier between us that neither of us knew how to break down. "Kevin?" My father's voice, gentle but firm, pulled me back from the precipice of terror. I blinked, the image of those gnarled, ancient feet fading from my mind's eye. The warm, familiar sense of the kitchen enveloped me, yeast, sugar, the comforting aroma of my father's strong coffee. For a moment, the terror receded, replaced by a wave of exhaustion. My father guided me to the kitchen table, his hand a steady presence on my back. He pulled out a chair, and I sank into it gratefully, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly. "Here, son," he said, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "Drink this, it'll warm you up." I wrapped my trembling hands around the mug, the heat radiating through the ceramic and into my cold fingers. It was my favorite chamomile tea with a spoonful of honey, just the way my father always made it. I wanted to tell him. The words were right there, perched on the tip of my tongue, desperate to spill out, but fear, thick and suffocating, held them captive. How could I possibly explain what I had seen, the bone-chilling terror that had gripped me in its clutches? How could I make him understand that this wasn't just my imagination running wild? My father seemed to sense my struggle. He reached across the table, his hand engulfing mine in a grip that was both strong and reassuring. His touch, rough and calloused from years of working with his hands, had always been a source of comfort. But now it felt different. It felt like a lifeline, a tether to reality in the face of the unexplainable. "Kevin," he said, his voice low and steady, "whatever it is, you can tell me." But the words wouldn't come. They felt heavy, leaden, stuck in my throat like stones. How could I possibly articulate the sheer terror of those ancient feet shuffling toward me through the mist, the feeling of icy dread that had seeped into my very bones? How could I describe the sense of wrongness, the feeling that I had glimpsed something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond the veil of reality? I looked up at my father, his face etched with concern, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of the gas lamp that hung above the kitchen table. I saw the love in his eyes, the unwavering belief in his son. But I also saw something else, a flicker of skepticism, a hint of doubt that I couldn't quite decipher. The fear tightened its grip, squeezing the words back down my throat. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing doubt in my father's eyes, of having him dismiss my experience as nothing more than a child's overactive imagination. So I did the only thing I could think to do at that moment. I retreated back into the safety of silence. It's nothing, Dad," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "Just a bad dream." The lie felt like ash in my mouth, leaving a bitter aftertaste. But it was easier than trying to explain the unexplainable, easier than risking the one constant in my life, my father's unwavering love and support. My father studied me, his eyes searching mine, trying to unravel the truth I was hiding. I knew he didn't fully believe me. The doubt was there, a seed planted in my fear. He squeezed my hand, conveying unspoken concern. "All right, son," he said, his voice weary, "if you say so." He began clearing the table, his usual cheerfulness replaced by silence. I watched him, my heart heavy with guilt. Life went on, as it always does. The sun rose and set, the seasons changed, and the memory of that terrifying encounter began to fade, like a nightmare receding with the dawn. But it never truly disappeared. It lingered in the shadows of my mind, a constant, unsettling presence. I continued to wake up with my father each morning, drawn back to the familiar routine, the comforting warmth of the kitchen and the unspoken bond we shared. But something had changed. The easy banter, the shared laughter, it was all tinged with a subtle unease, an unspoken tension that hung in the air between us. The fog, once a familiar sight in the early morning hours, now filled me with a primal dread. I avoided looking out the windows before sunrise, my gaze instinctively drawn to the spot where I had seen those ancient shuffling feet. The fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to resurface. My father never mentioned the incident again, but I knew he hadn't forgotten. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite place. It was as if he knew I was keeping a secret that was slowly poisoning the well of our relationship. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that terrifying encounter began to lose its sharp edges, dulled by time and the reassuring normalcy of everyday life. But just when I thought I had finally put it behind me, the fog returned. It rolled in one evening, thick and heavy, blanketing our small town in an eerie silence. I watched from my bedroom window as the familiar landscape was swallowed by the swirling grey mist, a sense of foreboding settling over me like a shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the fog was more than just a meteorological phenomenon. It felt alive somehow, malevolent, as if it were a harbinger of something sinister lurking just beyond our perception. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing, my senses on high alert. The fog pressed against my bedroom window, its presence both suffocating and vaguely threatening. I could hear the wind howling outside, its mournful cry seeming to echo the growing unease in my heart. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. I dreamt of swirling mists, of ancient, gnarled trees with branches that reached out like skeletal fingers, and of those same horrifying feet shuffling slowly towards me through the darkness. I woke with a start, my heart pounding against my ribs, my body bathed in a cold sweat. The room was pitch black, the only sound the steady drumming of rain against my bedroom window. I lay there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, willing my racing heart to slow. As I lay there listening to the symphony of the storm raging outside, I became aware of another sound, faint and distant at first, but growing steadily louder. It was a low, guttural moan, like the wind whistling through a crypt, sending shivers down my spine. The moaning grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, my body rigid with terror, every nerve ending screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but lie there helpless in the darkness. Terror, raw and primal, seized me in its icy grip. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my head under the thin blanket, as if that could somehow shield me from whatever lurked on the other side of the door. The moaning continued, relentless, its low, guttural tones seeming to vibrate the very air in the room. My mind raced, desperate for an explanation, for a rational thought to cling to in the face of the unexplainable. The wind? A stray animal? But deep down I knew the truth. This was something else entirely, something ancient and evil, something that had been drawn to me, that had been waiting for this moment to make its presence known. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, every muscle in my body tensed, my breath trapped in my chest. The moaning grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be right outside my door, as if whatever was making that sound was now pressing its ear against the thin wood, listening, waiting. Just when I thought I could bear it no longer, the moaning stopped. The silence that followed was almost as deafening, heavy with unspoken menace, pregnant with the anticipation of something truly terrifying. I lay there, frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, trapped in the grip of a terror I had never known. Then a sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. The slow, deliberate creak of my bedroom door opening. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, my body trembling uncontrollably. "Don't look," I thought desperately. "Whatever you do, don't look." But curiosity, that primal urge to confront the unknown, proved stronger than my fear. Slowly, agonizingly, I opened my eyes a sliver, just enough to see the shadowy figure that had entered my room. It stood silhouetted against the faint glow emanating from the hallway, its form tall and gaunt, its edges blurring in and out of focus, as if it were struggling to maintain its presence in the physical world. And then I saw them, those feet. They were unmistakable, bare, wrinkled, the skin pale and papery, the toenails thick and yellowed, grotesquely long and curled. The same feet I had seen shuffling through the fog that night, the same feet that had haunted my dreams ever since. But this time, they were attached to a figure that seemed vaguely familiar, yet utterly alien. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to make out more details. The figure wore a tattered garment. Moonlight illuminated its face, revealing an old woman with a grotesque smile. The face resembled my own, twisted by time. The figure stepped closer, filling the room with a cold, oppressive weight. I was frozen in terror. Then it vanished, leaving only the sound of rain. The rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm against the silence. I lay there, my body still, my mind racing. The encounter left an indelible mark on my soul. The image of the old woman haunted my thoughts. Who was she? What did her presence mean? Was she a harbinger of something sinister, or a manifestation of my own deepest fears? The questions swirled in my mind unanswered. The world now seemed fraught with unseen dangers. The veil between the known and the unknown had been lifted. The experience left me shaken to my core. I'd always been a curious child, eager to explore. Now, faced with the undeniable evidence, I felt a mix of fear and fascination. The memory of that night, of the figure in my room, has stayed with me ever since. It has become a part of me, a secret I carry deep within. I never spoke of the experience to anyone. How could I explain the unexplainable? But even in my silence, I knew that something had changed within me. The world no longer seemed quite so solid, so predictable. I learned to live with the uncertainty, the knowledge that there were things in this world beyond our comprehension.